Hello everyone, Shinto Bean here with some more Warhammer combat cards. I had a request to do a video about the best warlords to use for intermediate level players. So I've come up with a list of decks that I thought would work well for those players. But first of all, I should say that it's been a very long time since I was at that rank, so my information might not be the most accurate. I've done my best to consult the database and pick out cards that are unlocked at lower ranks, ones that those players are more likely to have in their collection. Just so you know, the ranks at which cards are unlocked has actually changed a lot since when I first started playing. So the cards that I unlocked early on are very different from the cards that players now, who are just starting now, will unlock. But I believe the information in the database is up to date, so I'm just going off of that. So, without further ado, let's get started. Now, we're starting with Chaos, and with Chaos it was actually pretty difficult. It was a toss-up between Skulltaker and Armin. So, Skulltaker was recently, I think, added to the general pool. I believe he's unlocked at rank 11 now. And on paper, he seems like he would be a very good option for lower ranking players. That special rule is pretty powerful and he's very easy to use. Just throw in a bunch of melee warriors. So I believe all of these melee bodyguards are unlocked before rank 30, some of them much earlier on. And you just bash away with the melee attacks. And it's a pretty fun deck to use. And they recently buffed Skulltaker's health as well, so he's a bit beefier than he was before. Now the other option is Armin, who also has a pretty good special rule, and this is just a pure psychic deck. Unfortunately, there's no Lord of Change in here because that is not unlocked until a bit later. The Occult Sorcerer, which is the 33-point card in there, is actually pretty strong. Psychic Link is a very strong trait, as long as you can ensure that you have other psychers on the field, and that of course applies to Armin himself as well. Of course, you'll want to have Armin leveled up for him to be truly powerful, and he is a legendary, so depending on your luck, you may have leveled him up several times or not at all. So either Skulltaker or Armin I felt would be pretty decent for Chaos. Now, for every other faction, I've just picked out one warlord. And so moving on to Necrons, I think Imhotep is a pretty good option. I remember him being very strong, and I prefer him over the Corpse Lord. Now, of course, there are other options as well, but I think Imhotep has a very good special rule that 20 damage can be very impactful, especially because you can play a little bit passively at the beginning, just readying your units, getting some free damage in, and then charge up a really strong ranged or melee attack that you can use to finish off the stronger enemy cards. So Imhotep also legendary, so in order for him to be truly powerful, you have to level him up as well. So that's just one issue with him. Also, the Annihilation Barge, if you have that unlocked, that also works pretty well with him as well. It's a pretty expensive card, and you'll notice that I'm not using up all of the slots. I'm only using a maximum of 6 slots for the bodyguards. Also, all of these decks are about 150 points. I should have mentioned that at the beginning, but yeah. So moving on to Eldari. Now for me personally, I used the Zephyr Blade quite a bit when I was a lower ranking player, but that was because Rakarth was not an option then. He did not even exist. So Rakarth has a very strong special rule, increases the health of all of your units over time, and so there are different builds that you can go with him. For this one, I've just done a sort of a hybrid melee and psychic build. So we got 3 melee units, the Solitaire, the Howling Banshee Exarch, and the Succubus, which are all pretty strong and they unlock pretty early. And then we've got 3 psychers. All of those have psychic link, so I'm honestly not sure, 100% sure how well this deck would work, but I feel like psychic Rakarth is pretty strong in general. And then moving on to Tau, we've got Commander Farsight. I remember Tau being very overpowered back in the day. They've been toned down a little bit since then, I think. They don't seem quite as popular these days, but they're pretty straightforward. Obviously, if you can have one of the really big battle suits, like the Riptide, or even Long Strike, that would be great, but those don't unlock till quite a bit later. so lower ranking players probably won't have access to those. You'll have to use these cheaper battle suits, which still do a decent job of shooting up the enemy. I got the shield drone in there to protect the battle suits, and then of course when Farsight deploys at the end, you can hit them with a really powerful melee attack. If you do not have Farsight leveled up much, then Shadow Sun might be the better option, just going all in with the shooting. Alright, moving on to Tyranids. We've got the Tervagon. Now the Tervagon is a very, very strong warlord at the beginning. It has such a good special rule, and you can get a whole lot of mileage out of those infinite Termagants. The issue with Tyranids is I think they don't really have access to amazing bodyguards early on. So the Sanctus and Kelemorph are pretty decent. The Tyranid Warrior in there, it has a lot of health but not that much damage. The Biovore is decent, and then the Hive Crone unlocks at around rank 30, I believe, so you might not have that at a very high level. It also doesn't really have much health either. So not really the best bodyguard composition here, but the Tervagon is just so strong that I had to include it on this list. Moving on to Orcs. Now Orcs have a lot of good options at the intermediate level. Of course, Captain Badruck is the obvious one, and he's very easy to use. If you've played any games in Ranked, I'm sure you've faced him. So I'm just skipping him now, because I do not want to encourage more people to play as Badruck. Instead, we're going with Boss Zagstruck, who is the melee option, and he's pretty strong as well. If you can put those Storm Boys in there, they get the free attack in with their Scout trait. Combos very well with Zagstruck. And then I've included a few other just lower ranking cards in there, like the Scrapjet, the Pain Boy, and the Knob. And then if you have Ed Zappa, who I believe unlocks at around rank 30, he's also a very good unit to use with Zagstruck, with the Psionic Blast. Alright, and then moving on to Servants of the Emperor, I think Inquisitor Greyfax is a really great warlord to use, very fun and quite flexible. You can use pretty much anything with her, but it was kind of hard to narrow down to a single build for Greyfax. So instead I'm going with the Commissar Yarrick, who's a bit simpler. And this is just a ranged build that I've used with him. You just throw in a bunch of ranged units, make sure to include a few big, powerful ranged units, as well as some very cheap fodder. So the Vindicare Assassin unlocks at rank 0, I believe. It's from the beginning, and it's a very strong card at the beginning, much stronger than it used to be back in the day. The Dune Crawler, also pretty good. The Lehman Russ, I think, doesn't unlock till around rank 30, so you might not have that one at a very high level. If you don't, you'll just have to substitute other ranged units in there. And then the Tempestus Scion and the Shock Trooper are really great with Yarrick because of their trait, Endless. They can respawn and just charge up the ranged attack. And then I just threw in the 3-point Battle Sister as well for another fodder card. You just want to make sure that most of your cards have that ranged buff when they ready to ensure that you're constantly getting the increased ranged attack throughout the match. And then finally, for Space Marines, Lieutenant Tolmaran has been one of the most popular options for as long as I can remember. And this is a very, this is the build that I used way back in the day. And I think it's still decent. I mean, the Invictor Tactical Warsuit is probably the biggest ranged vehicle that unlocks at the lower ranks. Now, of course, there are better options like the Storm Talon gunship, but that doesn't get unlocked until a little bit later. So, yeah, Invictor, you want to deploy early and just watch it increase its firepower each time you deploy another Marine. You can use an Apothecary to heal it up a little bit just to keep it alive a little bit longer, but yeah, Tolmaran has a very powerful special rule. It's pretty easy to use, so this has been a pretty solid build, I think, that's worked out for a lot of players. So that is pretty much it for this series. Let me know if you agree or disagree with any of my choices. And again, which bodyguards you use just depends on what you have in your collection. You may have gotten cards from rank unlocked packs or campaigns, so you may just have different options, but just use your best judgment to use your cards that you've leveled up, that you've invested the most in. And of course you can substitute out any of the cards in here. You know, it doesn't have to be these exact bodyguards, but this was just what I thought would work decently well with these specific warlords. So let me know what you think. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.